All right, shalom and assalamta, Lidj Yefdi, Yefdeyah, RastafariRenaissance.com, and this will more than likely, be placed on a URZ, the Upper Room of Zion Discipleship Radio, before it actually goes to the channel here for Lidj Yefdi on YouTube. But just some thoughts that we have been having from quite some years back. I would say somewhere around 5 to 6 or 7 years ago. Just looking at the entire landscape of, I wouldn't say diverse doctrines, but then again, that plays into a lot of it as well, and a lot of the differing methods in which ones go about expressing themselves within Rastafari, and even those without, from a certain instance, especially those who would have, a certain affinity or subscribe to certain principles within Rastafari. We tend to see that there's a lot that really goes into the particulars of Rastafari and how ones tend to express it, or even, work out their salvation, like, Brother Yadin would mention in many instances, and many others have mentioned from such a time that, I've tend to check out, here and there. But as far as, what we have been seeing lately, and it even so inspired, the entire title of, our own platform at RastafariRenaissance.com, we again began to notice a lot of not only the growth, but, the instances in where ones would start to deal in different avenues, start to deal in different, things that ones would probably not so much recognize that Rastafari had been dealing with, even from its inception. So we speak about business, we speak about arts, we speak about spirituality, so on and so forth, between those, particulars of what we know as the movement. So I'm just coming to this particular year, this, renewing of the Ethiopic and Hebraic New Year's, and again, all of the news we received, whether at home or abroad in the diaspora, we really had to take in a time where we could just assess, as much as we could at least, because, it seems that, so much of our time is limited, for so many different particular works. But even with all of that, we started to see that, there's, these compartments in which Rastafari is seemingly, slowly but surely easing its way into. Though Rastafari has always had such a, I guess you can say, disdain for many things that were political, a disdain for many things that were, in that sense of the political structures, or these particulars in which certain things were laid out from a certain extent, and also the thought process in which that came into play. It really put ones in a space where, they sought to distance themselves, from certain ones, especially those who wouldn't work for the benefit of the masses of people, and only sought to, enrich themselves, and of course, leave what was ever left. We would say, in that sense, just to, bring it home and speak plainly on that sense for the rest of the peoples. And this goes across the board, for any government, any, particular entity, structure, so on and so forth. But even with all that, and many ones from many different countries, many different walks of life, many different ethnicities and nationalities, coming to Rastafari in a sense of, earnestly and honestly, just seeing what ones would present, especially as an alternative. we started to see that many ones, started to become a little bit more active in educating themselves on certain political structures and political themes, topics, and subject matters. And, many ones who, you might not see out on the forefront become very versed in that sense on much of things political, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just one front. So we have the political forefront. In many other instances, we see a lot of ones, looking into business and commerce, especially with so much of the world changing at the rapid pace that it's changing now. We start to see many ones, especially, among many of, the Rastafari Hitoch, or, what we would, that's, mostly a term that we would use, amongst Rastafari daughters, or so on and so forth, the sisters, what have you. However, you may like to present that in a certain fashion. We tend to hear of many sisters and brothers, for that matter, as well, looking on, certain broader strokes, looking to particular avenues and particular endeavors in certain areas of business, certain areas of commerce in which, we hadn't really heard before. And, I'm sure that, the masses probably hadn't heard in quite a while as well. So even on that front, that really spoke to many matters, especially dealing with the diaspora, with so many ones who may be of like minds, but would be spread out over a vast amount of areas, geographical locations, states, kingdoms, so on and so forth, how that goes. But even with all of that into place, one still, sought to make their visions into realities. And still to this day, we still have many ones working in that fashion, trying to bring that about. So that's another front, even so with the business. So we have politics, we have business. Now, of course, on the the main front in which has always seemingly brought anyone of any walk of life to Rastafari was the spirituality. Now, in this sense, it really goes without saying that so much of what Rastafari particularly is spiritual. I mean, that almost it clearly can go without saying that without one's really having to delve too deeply into it. And even so, we won't do too much delving into that subject as far as that goes, because usually we expound upon that here on this particular channel as well as our other platforms. So, indeed, please stay tuned for that. And even so with many other ones as well, be sure to check them out from time to time. So, moving right along, just keeping to what we know as the valiancy and the strength of Rastafari, which has brought so many ones in from all over the world, particularly dealing with spirituality. And even so, the artwork and expression can be kind of coupled with spirituality as well as the business aspect. But artwork and expression, those themes seem to play out in different ways. So we really don't want to put it in a specific category or another. But clearly, it can make its own case, on that sense, just to fit into whatever particular ideal ones would see fit in that matter. But even so, with the spiritual, one's always, even to this day, seem to hold Rastafari to the fact that, well, Rastafari is a religion. Rastafarianism is a religion. And even so, with much of what ones would deal with as a Rastafari in the West, it's seemingly propagated as that, especially when dealing with certain things in law and those particular statutes of whatever nation ones might come from or be living in the West. And that, is almost inescapable in many ways and many factions. and instances, we would say, on that front. But just to keep things, at a particular base and at home for this, reasonment we're putting forward to ones even still to this day, we still uphold that Rastafari is not a religion. Ones who are more so Rastafari would be more so into the spiritual practices, but it's not a religion. It's not an organized fashion in which ones would actually have a set of rules that are particular to Rastafari. Rastafari itself is more particular to a set of rules which actually comes from scripture. So that, you know, kind of qualifies it to be a religion, but in the same sense, it nullifies it on that sense as well. But sticking to the topic and bringing that forward, we have these three particular and strongholds of what we're seeing shaping to be the whole of Rastafari and what ones are seemingly growing up to in a certain sense. And this is not just within our own particular ranks, not within our own particular fellowship. This is what we're seeing, on an international front. There are many, many movements, many ones who are being active on an activist front or, what have you, whatever seems to come up at a particular time, whether it be in the politics, the business, or the spiritual aspects of Rastafari. And what we're finding is that if ones could really even start to reach out to themselves in that sense, quote unquote, but keeping what they have going on at the particular moment and pushing forward to it and seeing how they could incorporate it within the whole of Rastafari, especially, with the given times that we live in as of today, and most of these shifts taking place on so many fronts, we see that Rastafari's potential, even still as of today, from its inception there in the West Indies and its strength growing, of course, here to North America and Europe and across the globe, especially there on the home front of the African continent, we are still seeing that so many movements have come and gone. But steadfastly, Rastafari has stuck to its principles and as truly an Indo culture, if you will. An Indo culture. It really has, withstood at the least 2 to 3 generations. So we're really seeing here on this particular time, this particular age in which we are living in, that if strength continues to come into Rastafari and ones are focusing intently on progressing and making that strength, the helm of what they see as part of their particular avenue, their particular goal, their particular reason for even coming to Rastafari, we'll see even much more than what we've been seeing now. Certain ones, of course, the markers, scorners, and scoffers would say that, of course, oh, well, over here, this particular group of Rastafari aren't doing anything, and they, have affected no change, so on and so forth, and this particular group or that particular group or this particular group, speaking of we really don't have the time to even entertain a lot of what is being said by certain ones, especially of today. Because in that sense, if we are paying attention so much to what's going on outside of the camp, as they would say, we're not taking care of the home front. The home front, of course, would be neglected. What we sought out to do would be even further postponed. will be even further delayed. So not so much as to, rant and rave about certain things, just, having a few thoughts and seeing, where certain ones are at this point, especially when it comes to, finding their niche, finding something that, they love to do, and if they could turn it into a business, or they could turn it into a passion which they couldn't, run away from, or, become, disannulled with, it really, begs the question again, how committed are all of these other movements, whether they be political, economical, or spiritual? Because what we're seeing at this very moment is though Rastafari may be fractured on certain senses, certain areas, certain particular principles, when it comes to certain groups, from group to group, camp to camp, as they would say, we still see that Rastafari still has this overlapping theme that is unshaken. Hence the fact of the matter that, of course, we really rave over the news which we had heard out of Ethiopia, Judah land amongst, the Khabarim, which we would say, with the repatriates, who of course have been there for a generation or two, depending on, whom you speak with. And the Ethiopian government, the modern federal democratic Ethiopian government of that particular republic, recognizing after so many years, so many generations, that the Rastafari have stayed unwavering, never gone unfaithful to Ethiopia and Ethiopians at home and abroad. And even with, all of the mocking, name calling, scoffing and scorning, and the propaganda that has been put out on certain ones, Rastafari has stayed steadfast, moving straight forward, no wavering, no wandering, just unrelentlessly strong on its principles, especially with dealing with Ethiopia, Shashamani in particular. And even though we are still at this moment awaiting further information, further dissemination of particulars of what has been presented, we even so see, certain members of the imperial Ethiopian family still alive and well. And as we mentioned, just from this past Ethiopian New Year, from by word of Dr. Ephraim Yisehaq, a great scholar amongst Ethiopian Jews of Beta Israel, or Ethiopians overall, as a scholar, a scholastic, and a educator on that front, a linguist, an anthropologist, what other hats, Dr. Yisehaq may wear. But even so, that news that he brought forward in the interview with Dr. Kaba Hiawatha Kamene with Philippe, he mentioned, of course, the emperor's great-grandson marrying a Afro-American woman of Guyanese descent. And again, it just begs the question, because even so, with my own experience and the things that I tend to put out, and I'm sure that other ones experience this as well, especially as a Rastafari, ones tend to challenge a lot of the things that are put out. They are, very gung-ho in engaging in debates in this time. Many ones are, very quick to challenge another one's facts in these days. So that, seems to be the tale of the time. But we definitely take note of that. We take consideration what other ones may put out, or even so what they think. From time to time, we don't dwell on those things, but we actually try to be as fair and balanced as possible, and check out certain things from time to time. But it just seems that the more the scandalous and the slanderous tend to throw out, especially against Rastafari, Ethiopians at home and abroad, and even so to that main front, Christianity, Hebraicism, even so Islam to that extent, and other spiritual practices. It just seems that many of those fronts are being beaten back by new facts, new instances, new happenings. As we mentioned, with the news coming out of Ethiopia and Shashamani about the repatriates, and of course moving forward to this particular year with the emperor's great grandson. And this is it just on I and I's own inception and I and I's own thought process. It's not going to stop, brothers and sisters. We'll see much more good news to come. It's whether the fact that we will be around to see it, we will be around to take part in it. Because the good news won't stop coming to fruition. You see certain ones saying certain things one day, and then you hear news out of Ethiopia, you hear news out of Africa, you hear news out of the Rastafari, you hear news out of the Caribbean, you hear news here in America that something has changed or something has happened. And usually that's the news that ones usually try to suppress. So even so, coming forward to this RSS number 3, Lech Lecha Tegalet, we tend to really see that mirror, which we always seem to reference, from our own findings, from our own studies. We mentioned and coin, and hopefully we will, further coin that phrase, the mirrors of a Hamo-Shemitic culture. We tend to see that mirror reflecting a lot of what we are studying, a lot of what we hope for, a lot of what we tend to see when we study these things, and of course try to apply them in our everyday lives. We really start to not only lean on our hope and expectation, but start to walk in it, start to revel in it, start to thrive in it. So just a note for ones on that sense. And, again, I know that so many ones have certain ideas and they're ready to bring those things out. But, again, take that time, just to, meditate on it for a moment, to work things out to its full extent, to plan to, the utmost, when the time allows. Because once those doors begin to be open to you, you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared. You have to be ready. You have to be ready to receive on that front. Many ones speak on the Kabbalah. Ethiopically, we say Kebele. And many ones, of course, especially those in the scholastic spheres, they, try to make this all a great mystic thing, a great occultic thing. But at its simplest, Kabbalah, Kebele, it means to receive. So ones have to prepare themselves for that. And that's really what the meditation that we, of course, are bringing forward to you here, which we have, really sat and really had a good head resting with Jah on that sense. Really, even so, just coming forward to the broadcast on the URZ. We really just, sat for a moment and meditated. We, put certain things aside just to sit and think, not on nothing, but just where we are at this particular moment. And of course, where we seek to go. So moving forward, brothers and sisters, I definitely still, hold firm, to the principles, as always, the laws, statutes, and commandments. Though many ones will speak ills, many ones would seek to propagandize, slander, mock, and scorn. We have to remember that no victory comes without struggle.